What if a sound could expose your true, hidden self and you didn't recognize it? Paradox of emotional resonance. Rain had been falling since morning, smearing the neon signs across Nashville's wet asphalt. In a small music therapy studio, tucked away in an alley behind the Ryman Theater, Casey leaned over the synthesizer panel, adjusting the settings. Her patient that day, Johnny Miller, had been slouched in the chair for half an hour, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Empty," he said flatly. His voice was like ash. Casey played a recording of a soft, lingering chord that faded into a barely audible rhythm. Normally, she worked through gradual engagement, a familiar melody, then a gentle modulation. But on the panel, a new function was blinking: resonance tuning, beta. Beside the indicator, a small log line read, "Update, RSN47, provider, RSL, status, installed." She didn't remember ordering the module, but without overthinking, slid the frequency control slightly above the standard range. 30 seconds later, Johnny straightened his shoulders. His eyes lit up. "Damn," he laughed softly. "I feel like I can do anything, right now." Casey froze. His laughter grew louder, and soon he was humming along to the simple rhythm, drumming his fingers on his knees. "What did you do?" he almost shouted with joy. "It's like I just woke up for the first time in 10 years." The session ended, but Johnny left with a radiant smile, typing something into his phone as he walked out. Casey stayed behind in the silence. In the session log, one frequency pulsed in highlighted text: 9.47 hertz. That evening, at home, she checked previous recordings. No patient had ever reacted that way. Entering the same settings into her home synthesizer, she hit play. A second later, a sharp noise flashed in her ears, and the world tilted slightly. Walls seemed to recede, and in the dark window opposite, she thought she saw her own reflection linger a fraction of a second longer than it should have. She didn't know that this night marked not just a new direction in therapy, but an encounter with someone else's and her own shadow. The next day, Casey's studio felt different, as if the walls had absorbed an invisible vibration overnight. She arrived earlier than usual to check the equipment. On the synthesizer panel, the 9.47 hertz frequency glowed with a soft blue light, almost teasing. Her first patient was Derek Cross, a rock guitarist infamous on the local scene for his temper. A week earlier, he'd blown a major deal. During negotiations, he'd yelled at the producer and thrown a chair. Now, he walked into the studio without a greeting, tossed his jacket on the couch, and sat with arms crossed. "Play something," he muttered. Without looking at him, Casey activated the frequency. A deep, bass-like pulse, imperceptible to the ear, wove itself into a soft guitar loop. Derek sat still for 2 minutes. Then his shoulders dropped. He began to sway slowly, fingers tracing imaginary chords. "Damn," he murmured. "I don't want to argue. Ever." He chuckled quietly, almost shyly. For Casey, it was like watching a volcano suddenly covered in snow. And at that moment, seeing energy and anger dissolve under her hand, she felt a sharp, almost physical taste of control, as if the world had become, for a second, pliable and responsive. Next came Sarah, a college student known for her sluggish, apathetic gaze. She feared expulsion for truancy and chronic lateness, but admitted it with indifference. Under the frequency, her eyes lit up. She spoke quickly, erratically, and eventually stood, pacing the room as if she couldn't sit still. Casey recorded the reactions in her notebook. "Derek, aggression, passivity. Sarah, apathy, hyperactivity. That evening, she met her friend Jen, a journalist. In a noisy bar, Casey described her observations and mentioned wanting to discuss them with Professor Martin Hill, an acoustics expert and old acquaintance she trusted. "You realize this is a discovery?" Jen said. "You can change people." "Not change," Casey corrected, "reveal." But inside, she knew. The feeling she got from this wouldn't be so easy to give up. On the third day, Casey invited Professor Hill to the studio. Tall, lean, with attentive eyes, he immediately noticed the resonance tuning module. "Are you sure you understand what this is?" he asked, running his fingers over the panel. "I understand the effect," Casey said, "not the cause." "This is using a binaural beat," Hill explained, tapping the screen. "Two slightly different frequencies in each ear create a third, phantom tone. It resonates with specific brain rhythms. You get phase synchronization. Neurons start firing in unison with that frequency." "And that makes people flip?" "Not flip," he corrected. "It triggers an autonomic response, shifts the balance of the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. Then comes limbic modulation. Suppressed emotions rise, habitual reactions are displaced. I'd call it emotional inversion through decoupling of the dominant affect." Casey tried to follow, but fixated on the word suppressed. "Everyone has a shadow emotional self," he went on. "Everything we hide from ourselves and others. This frequency just opens the door." He paused, then added quietly, "My brother, he killed himself. No one knew he had depression. If I'd had a tool to uncover it sooner." Later that day, Casey asked Jen to take a short test. At a cafe, before the frequency, Jen listened with genuine empathy, asking clarifying questions and taking notes, professional, respectful toward the people in the stories. In the studio, Jen joked at first, but agreed to try. Under 9.47 Hz, her smile vanished, her voice turned cold, and her gaze became sharp as a blade. "You're wasting your life, Casey," she said evenly. "You're afraid to admit you want power." Laura, Casey's colleague, experienced a spike in pulse during her test. She pressed a hand to her chest, saying her heart was beating faster than it should. Casey logged it, tachycardia, another side effect. When Jen left without saying goodbye, Casey remained in silence, staring at the panel where 9.47 Hz glowed steadily. She understood. Her work now touched not just emotions, but the very core of who a person was. A week after Jen's session, everything spun out of control. Casey noticed whispers about the miracle frequency in closed musician and therapist groups. At first, these were cautious mentions in chats, but someone posted a short video of their session. Soon, it spread through local networks, and a radio host played a weird track containing the background 9.47 Hz. The tipping point came at an underground club on Nashville's outskirts. A young DJ, known for experimental sound, embedded the frequency into his set. The crowd swayed at first, but then things turned strange. The most withdrawn started shouting and hugging, while seasoned partygoers suddenly went silent and sat against the walls. Some left in tears, others laughed uncontrollably. That night saw the first disciples, convinced they'd found the key to their true selves, and the first victims who felt they'd lost control. The effect snowballed. The set was chopped into clips on TikTok, went viral, and was featured by a popular blogger, pulling in millions of views. Derek called Casey himself. His voice was quiet, without its usual edge. He said he'd botched important negotiations. He couldn't hold his ground, just agreed to everything. "I'm losing myself," he admitted. That same day, Jen published an article in her outlet, a cold, analytical look at the phenomenon, highlighting ethical risks and ruined lives. Casey's name wasn't mentioned, but she knew it was about her. Jen stopped answering her messages. That evening, Hill came to the studio, speaking quickly, formally. "I need full access to your data. If we file with the ethics board, we might protect the project from the wrong hands." His tone carried a note Casey couldn't miss. He was no longer speaking only for himself. And that meant the circle of those aware of the frequency was wider than she could allow. Days began to blur, as if the frequency had seeped into the fabric of time. Casey saw fewer patients, spending more hours alone in the studio, listening to the steady 9.47 Hz pulse. To keep her bearings, she set up a self-diagnostic protocol, measuring pulse and heart rate variability before and after listening, recording sensations and dreams. Her dream journal filled with repeating motifs, windowless corridors, mirrors where her reflection moved slightly slower than she did. Sometimes the reflection would look directly into the surveillance camera, and she'd wake with a chill in her chest. Sarah's call came unexpectedly. She spoke quickly, as during the session, but panic laced her voice. The hyperactivation had driven her to take on too much. She missed deadlines, submitted flawed work, and was now facing expulsion. "I thought I'd get better, but everything's falling apart," she said, before the line went dead. Casey realized the cost of revealing might be too high. Meanwhile, Hill answered calls less often, and when he came by, he was curt and distant. "We have a shot at serious funding," he said. "People who understand what this technology is." "Anonymous sponsors?" Casey's irritation sharpened. "Is this about Oris L?" He didn't answer directly. "This is science, Casey. We can't lock it away." "And I won't let it be turned into a weapon," she shot back. Their eyes met in the dark window's reflection, and Casey thought the reflections lingered a fraction of a second, just like in her dreams. Late that night, alone, she reviewed the camera footage. In one clip, the reflection really did lag, only by a moment, but enough to send a shiver down her spine. She knew her next encounter wouldn't be with a patient, but with someone already waiting on the other side of the mirror. She sat in the patient's chair, headphones pressed tight. The steady 9.47 Hz pulse filled the air, and the walls seemed to dissolve. From the mirror opposite stepped a figure, her exact double, but with a different gaze. Confident, cold, without a trace of doubt. "This is who you are," the shadow said evenly. "You've always wanted to influence people. Admit it." "I'm helping them," Casey replied, but even she heard the tremor in her voice. Helping or taking control? Think of Hill's brother. If he'd had one session, he might still be alive. How many tragedies could we prevent if we uncovered people sooner? The argument cut deep. Casey remembered Hill's face when he spoke about his brother, and for the first time felt the temptation, not just in power, but in the possibility of saving lives. The shadow stepped closer. "We could weave the frequency into testing systems, music, ads. No one would know, but everyone would become more honest." A strange emptiness spread in Casey's chest. Her own emotions felt muted. This was the cost of integration. Prolonged resonance dulled her feelings, and she was at risk of getting stuck this way. She turned sharply to the synthesizer and pulled up the system log. At the bottom, beneath lines of technical data, one stood out. RSN 47, build, RAURS, lambda, auto-update enabled. Proof: the external player was real and could update the module anytime. You can erase everything, the shadow said, or change the signature. Then we'll stay, but under a different key. Inside, she tore between destroying it forever or rewriting it for right use. Casey took a deep breath. Her hand hovered over the controls. She knew that any choice now would change not just her life, but the world beyond this room. The morning began with a news ticker in a cafe. City Clinic imposes moratorium on resonance therapy pending further research. The next frame showed screenshots from the Shadow Self forum, where anonymous users discussed journeys to the true self and posted recordings of the pure frequency. In her studio, Casey laid everything related to the project on the large wooden table: the hard drive with session archives, printed charts, a flash drive with the original module. She worked silently, methodically. Files were erased, paper fed into the fire. The smell of melting plastic mingled with cold coffee. Her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a new piece by Jen, a cold but honest report in which she admitted confronting her own shadow and understanding the danger of manipulation. No excuses, but a hint of dialogue. Casey read to the end, and her chest felt slightly lighter. Hill sent a short message. "I'm out. I won't sell this." No explanations, no justifications, just a decision. Casey knew. He'd made his choice, a gesture that wouldn't change the world, but meant something to her. The module remained. She opened the control panel and switched the auto-update key to disabled. Then she placed the device in a small wooden box and hid it in a secret compartment behind the bookshelf. That evening, on a closed dark web chat, a new post appeared. Resonance 47 Fork, a build with no locks and full instructions. Casey never saw it, but somewhere deep down, she knew the frequency was already living its own life. She stepped outside. In the shop window opposite, her reflection moved in sync, with no delay. But in the silence, she still caught the faint, steady pulse. Not fear, but knowledge. And that knowledge would stay with her forever.